Continue. But I think there are also some things that we need to kind of rewire in the way government works to make it work better for people. And I lived this. So for example, I'm watching them basically burn the federal government down. And obviously I've got problems with the way they're destroying, cancer research or making it harder for the FAA to keep airplanes safe. Like, a lot of that is bad. But I will also admit that I have been furious and frustrated with the way things work in our federal government. And it's actually gotten to where it makes it harder to do things that I think progressives in particular care about. Building things, building housing, building roads and bridges, which I lived for 4 years, building clean energy projects, like stuff we should objectively definitely be doing. And we've gotten in our own way with these layers of process, layers of procedure, all of them introduced with good intentions, but which collectively have made it almost impossible or unaffordable to do anything.
So you want less regulations?
So we need they need to be smarter, and there needs to be less procedure. Still powerful regulations to keep people safe.
So there should be a department to make sure the government is efficient. I think that's like really a great, I think that's where you're going, and it's great.
This is another example.
Didn't you work on that in the private sector? Isn't that what?
Yeah.
What was that company that you work for? The consultant company? McKinsey.
Yeah.
And isn't that partially like what governments will hire a company like that to do Doge stuff, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't call it.
You're a fucking Doge, aren't you? You're such a Doge, dude.
If Doge was actually about government efficiency, I'd be all for it.
But it's not about that.
No.
What is it about?
It's about power. Look, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Because
you telling me people in government are concerned with power?
I know. It's shocking.
This is insane.
I know. Hot take.
Truth bombs being dropped on Flagrant.
No, but look at it this way. When I was in government in the South, like as mayor, when I had my kind of small government that I was running, we like took whole departments apart and put them back together. We removed people who weren't performing very well. And by the way, that was hard. Like, one of the reasons I've always had a problem with this president is like he emerged kind of play acting, like firing people for fun, right? It was like his tagline is "You're fired." For me, at least, as like a young like CEO basically of a city government, other than dealing with violence and death, the worst part of my job was firing people. Like, I hated it, especially because like it wasn't necessarily a bad person, but you had a person who's in a role that they didn't fit in, and their department wasn't doing as well as I thought it needed to do to serve residents. I would have this very painful conversation where we'd sit down, I'd look them in the eye, and that sucked for obviously most of all for them. But anyway, we were not afraid to do that because you have to do that.
Yeah.
But look at what happened when they came in, right? If this is actually about government efficiency, then the problem you would be solving, which is a real problem, is that in the federal government, it is too hard to reward your top performers. So you could be somebody who could be commanding a multi-million-dollar salary in the private sector, working on something wildly important, but there's just no way that you're getting, you're in your particular pay grade, same as everybody else. Yeah. And to remove your bottom performers. Like, a lot of people who've been in and out of business and government will tell me, like, when I was in the private sector and the public sector, actually, like, the top 10% were pretty much the same, these amazing driven people. The government ones weren't compensated as well, but they were purpose driven. But the bottom 10% was completely different because I couldn't do anything about the bottom 10%. Right? So imagine if Doge had come in and they had gone through every department and said, okay, we're going to create a way to reward the top performers. And we're also going to analyze either whose job description is no longer needed, or their job performance is not there. And even though it's painful, even though maybe it's politically tough, like, we're going to show them the door. That would be one thing. But they just sent an email to everybody, many of whom were in fact top performers. Like, some of the people they fired who got caught up in this thing, people got fired just based on whether you were in a category called probationary employee. But to be clear, probationary isn't like you fucked up and you're on probation.
Yeah, you could start.
You could actually be because you were promoted.
Yeah.
You could be a 7-year veteran at the FAA, or maybe you'd been there as a contractor, but you were so good that the FAA said, we want to hire you now as a government employee. And even though it might have been a little pay cut, you went for it.
Yeah.
And you're probationary.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, like, you wake up one day and this office, department, whatever Doge is, clearly hasn't like gone through and checked like who's doing a good job or there's no way, because there wasn't even time to do that. And they're just like, guess what, you're fired. Too bad.
I think there's I wouldn't say unanimous support with the criticism of Doge, but I think that there is a lot of support for the way that it's been handled. Though I would also say that the idea of an agency that is attacking bloat, and excess spending of the government.
Absolutely.
Is a bipartisan supported issue as well. I think initially when when Elon first announces this, and I think it's Elon and Vivek, people are really supportive of it, I think on both sides. They're like, yeah, let's cut some government spending.
No, if you're actually doing it for real, and that's another part of the answer to your question of like what Democrats should be talking about, because I think we're the ones who believe, some say we believe it to a fault, like we believe it naively, but we're the ones who believe that there is, the government has the, if you do it right, government has the power to make people better off. But if we're going to do that, let's actually do it. And part of that does mean like taking a hard look at everything we do. And I mean, I remember, again, most of my examples will come from transportation, right? But I remember something that went on with the FAA where they had to get some special waiver in order to allow a certain class of airplane to fly because there was a regulation that said there had to be a switch to turn off the no smoking light. And this was written back when sometimes you turned off the no smoking light. Now, obviously, there's just always a no smoking light because you can't smoke on airplanes. And there's this like scramble. You know, that's the kind of stuff that we should absolutely be getting. And there are like things that we do in government sometimes, or in the military, we call it a self-licking ice cream cone. Like there's definitely things that are there. These just like self-perpetuating processes that nobody would have come up with on their own, but they're still there. I think we should absolutely own that space because we have a good faith belief that government should serve people better and should work better. And we should be the ones who are making that happen.
So on that, so this idea with Doge, it seems to me, and again, I only know like the most surface level version of it, is that the way that the government becomes more efficient is just firing a bunch of people. That seems just like saving money. I don't know if that's how it becomes more efficient. The efficiency is getting rid of the bureaucracy that stops a plane from flying just because it doesn't have an on and off switch for a smoking light, right?
But it's surgery because you don't want to get rid of the part of the bureaucracy that makes sure the planes don't crash.
That is good and protects people.
Right?
I 100%, because I think that there is altruism and benevolence in a lot of these policies, right? They're trying to protect people.
They're all there for some reason or another.
Yeah, and like maybe some is like, I don't know, what have you experienced? Like you were, Secretary of Transportation, like when you're trying to rebuild some bridge or whatever like that, what was the biggest hiccup that you experienced that you're like, we got to just get this out of the way? There's no way we're going to be able to improve people's lives if this is here. What is an example of that?
Well, so there's an entire process where to permit a federal project, you have to listen to you have to take in every comment from anybody who wants to weigh in, and then you have to respond to every comment, or a human has to kind of review all of that. Which, by the way, one thing I'm really worried about is if you have, let's say there's some regulation coming and an industry wants to stop it, can they use
just keep
AI?
commenting?
Yeah, or can you use AI? Because it used to be like, well, you'd have to take the trouble to write a letter, or at least go to the trouble of like getting people to write form letters, right? Now you could write customized letters. It could all look different.
Use bureaucracy to fight bureaucracy.
Well, you use bureaucracy to stop something from happening. Which is a real problem if that's a thing that needed to happen, especially because you also need to go through that process to remove a regulation or to replace or to modernize it. So there's this level of pride, and I encountered it all the time.